Saturday's preseason finale against the New Orleans Saints is the final audition for a handful of players. We'll talk about who they are here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fresh off the heels of a Devon Vele trade, the Broncos will have a ton of players under the microscope here in Saturday's preseason finale against the New Orleans Saints. Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You know, it's your team every day. Thank you so much to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, become one. Hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. We got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show. Kind of three aspects here that we're looking at in the final audition in the Broncos' final preseason game against the Saints here on Saturday, 11 a.m. morning Mountain Time kickoff. We'll talk about several young wide receivers who are under the microscope in terms of practice squad spots potentially after the Broncos solidified the 53-man roster at the position itself. We'll also go through and tell you why the clock is ticking on Caleb Lohner and why that pre-draft vision hasn't gotten there yet. He's up against the clock. And then we'll talk about Audric Estime and why he needs the game of his life in Saturday's game against the Saints to make a case for himself at the running back position. You get all here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. Make sure you check out the FanDuel app today. Football season is around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Sayre, yesterday we broke down the Devon Vele trade and what it means for this Broncos team. And ironically enough, the Broncos may see Vele here on Saturday lining up against them. But I wanted to get your thoughts here on this young wide receiver room because I feel like a lot of these young guys, the microscope gets a little bit bigger on them, not for the 53, but for spots potentially on the practice squad.
Right. The Devon Vele trade really throws things for a loop here for the Broncos at wide receiver, because now we're kind of looking at this wide receiver group with a bit of fresh eyes. Like you mentioned, it doesn't feel like any 53-man roster spots are up for grabs, but certainly when you're one injury away, from anything happening at this position or any position, right? These guys come up off the practice squad all the time. And so not only are we watching what the Broncos guys are doing, but maybe some other guys around the league that the team could bring in, because that one of the top wide receiver spots on this team's practice squad, Cody, is going to be an attractive spot for potentially a veteran that does get cut, because the Broncos can say, hey, you're kind of the next man up here at this position. So really fascinating from that vantage point. But we've seen throughout the preseason, Courtney Jackson making some plays out there, both as a punt returner and as a receiver. I know other guys at practice, Joaquin Davis, Jerwan Newton, those guys have made plays during training camp. And then, of course, everybody's favorite A.T. Perry, he's been working his way back as well. So interesting development here for the Broncos to now give an opportunity to these younger guys at receiver that are vying for practice squad spots.
I think so much of the question here is going to be how many on the practice squad, right? You only get 16 players on your practice squad. And this year, unfortunately, the Broncos don't have that international designation that gives them kind of that 17th guy because of the exemption here. But you make some good points. Think about it this way too. Michael Bandy has been on the practice squad for the last handful of years. He's been Mr. Reliable. He's been the preseason training camp practice all-star. And, he's offered a lot of value here. But the more I look at it, I ask myself this question here, and there's nothing against Michael Bandy at all. Dude is a competitor. But the question when it comes to this roster and maybe even player development, do any of these receivers that the Broncos have, these younger guys that are in the mix, do they have a chance to play for you maybe sometime down the road? Or if there is an injury and you need to call someone up because you do get 3 practice squad of the game day elevations, which guy offers you the most value? To me, I think there are a couple of guys. I think A.T. Perry will probably end up on the practice squad. He's been progressing along a lot more. He's been forgotten about a little bit. Now that we brought it up, Broncos Country is going to be chopping at the bit for A.T. Perry. But I really think guys like Joaquin Davis, we talked about Courtney Jackson. I think he's made a strong case. I even think Jerwan Newton has been a guy who's made a case for himself as well. Out of those guys that I mentioned, even including Bandy, how many wide receivers do you think they carry onto the practice squad? And if of those numbers, who do you think will probably have the best chance to fulfill those spots?
Well, I think they'll definitely have 3 receivers on the practice squad just because if you're carrying 5 onto the active roster, I think having 3 on the practice squad is kind of a sweet spot for you. It gives you options. You can develop guys, so you want to see that happen for this team. I think of the guys that you mentioned, I don't know how you can not say A.T. Perry. I know recency bias would say that, well, it should be Joaquin Davis or it should be Courtney Jackson because those guys have actually been making plays in the preseason, but we forget A.T. Perry. I know it was a couple of years ago now, but the dude had 4 touchdowns and averaged over 20 yards a catch in regular season NFL action. And the Broncos could have easily cut him a long time ago if they wanted to. But we know that Cody Roark is in the front office. He obviously was part of drafting him there in New Orleans. Other members of this coaching staff know him dating back to their time at New Orleans, although not Sean Payton, because I believe he was drafted in 2023, Cody. So one of those years that Sean wasn't there. So A.T. Perry, I think, maybe gets a little bit of a jolt of new life here. And what would be even more fascinating is if he plays in this preseason game against the Saints. Now we'll have to wait and find out if that's going to happen, but I would love to see that. I'd love to see him make some noise again because the hope of what he could be obviously hasn't been just dismissed by the team yet.
Well, and you said it perfectly. There's a reason he's still on the roster. There's a reason he's still very much in the mix here. I'll say last week he graduated into individual period, which is good for him coming back, obviously, after the knee procedure that he had that kept him out of mandatory minicamp, the start of training camp there initially. He's now just kind of worked his way back. So I don't think that there's a rush necessarily on, all right, we got to make a decision on AT. We're worried about losing him through waivers. I think he'll clear very much. I don't think he'll play in Saturday's game. But if we're going with 3 receivers on the practice squad here, I do agree. I think my 3, one would be A.T. Perry. I think Joaquin Davis would be the other. And I'm going to go with Jerwan Newton too. And that's excluding guys like Courtney Jackson and Michael Bandy, which is a tough decision. If they carry 4, I mean, where do they go there? Do they go Courtney Jackson or do they go Michael Bandy? I don't know. Bandy's got some favor there with Joe Lombardi and obviously this coaching staff with Sean Payton. So that would be a tough decision to kind of nail and iron out there here. I imagine the Broncos would carry 1 running back on the practice squad if they end up carrying 4 on the 53. But we'll find out next week when roster cuts do happen. We'll find out what that pecking order is overall in terms of the depth chart. But I agree with you. I mean, so let's go through maybe one thing we want to see from this young wide receiver room this upcoming week that maybe we haven't seen so far in the first couple of weeks of the preseason. What are you looking for?
I want to see somebody take over, just like we saw from Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant last week, and we don't need to see that from them again. I hope they don't really play all that much at all, Cody, because now you've traded away your depth guy, you're right? You've traded away Devon Vele. So these other guys need to show a little something here, especially with some extended action that, hey, I can get open. I can make plays after the catch. I can make contested catches. I can help you convert in the red zone or move the chains on 3rd down. All of those types of things that you want to see situationally from these receivers kind of just taking over in these situations. Now, obviously that's easier said than done, but I think those are the things that we do want to see is that ball dominance, that my ball mentality, and the ability to go out there and capitalize in a huge moment now, which before it was already huge because you're still putting stuff on tape, but now there's new context to it. Devon Vele being traded opens up a spot for you, not necessarily on the 53, but certainly on this team and the overall pecking order.
I'm sticking to my guns here. I'm going with Joaquin Davis. I'm going for a big breakout game for him. I've loved what I've seen from him in practice. Great ability to track the football, but man, he can make tough contested catches with really good coverage. I mean, even early on in training camp when they're doing one-on-one drills against the DBs, he had a couple of really nice catches despite Riley Moss having super tight coverage on him. I think Joaquin Davis adds that size factor that Sean Payton clearly values. And has said that there's a preference for the taller and the bigger receivers. He's going to be my guy. If you can give me one name that out of all those guys here that you think is going to have a big game at receiver from the young standpoint, who is it?
I'll go Courtney Jackson then, building off of last week, right? Had some really nice plays after the catch, kind of showed off. I think he almost clocked 21 miles per hour on the in-game GPS too. So he's got some speed and he plays fast as well. So how about Courtney Jackson there for the Denver Broncos having a big game against the New Orleans Saints here on Saturday?
All right, Broncos Country, make sure you let us know your thoughts here on the Broncos young wide receiver room and which ones you have under the microscope against the New Orleans Saints here. But coming up next, we're going to tell you why the pre-draft vision for Caleb Lohner might be fading away. And time, It's a ticking. We'll break it down and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by FanDuel. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or you're ready to crown your Super Bowl champ, the Denver Broncos, before week one even kicks off, hey, this is your moment.
One thing you can do as well is I always do this before the season. I like to go together and parlay all of my division winners in one essential bet there in terms of being able to see what value I can get there. If the Broncos are going to win, certainly that elevates it when you talk about the odds over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. So you can do that yourself, or you can crown your champion here in the month of August. Make sure you go do that inside the FanDuel app. So visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game.
Caleb Lohner has been a lottery ticket for the Denver Broncos as a 7th-round pick in this year's draft, but are they potentially planning on moving on from him after this preseason game? It does sound a little bit like the clock is ticking for Caleb Lohner as we approach the final week of the preseason. So he's in focus on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. We're going to talk about Caleb Lohner as well as Audric Estime. But before we do that, Cody and I want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. We really appreciate you being part of what we're doing here, whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on YouTube, or if you do both, because I like to do both, Cody. I throw us on in the car sometimes. I love to throw on our friends around the Locked On Podcast Network as well on YouTube, because they got great things to say. So let's talk about Caleb Lohner, obviously, because this is Sean Payton said on Tuesday, he's talking about how they're going to be monitoring the wire at tight end. He was asked specifically about Caleb Lohner. And, Caleb had the 3 penalties in the preseason game against the Arizona Cardinals. We obviously saw him struggling. I don't know what you're seeing out there at practice, Cody, but obviously a guy who played 56 snaps of football in college, like there's going to be some obvious, learning curve there. Like you have to be willing to be patient with a guy, but as an NFL operation, how can you afford to be patient with a guy like this, right? And what are the Broncos going to do? Has the vision changed at all for Caleb Lohner being anything more than a project?
I don't think the vision for Caleb has necessarily changed. I think maybe the timeline for maybe trying to see where he's at, because I think it is highly unrealistic for the Broncos to say, hey, we're going to draft this tight end who we really like his elite athletic traits. We loved how he tested at his pro day. We're going to take him in the 7th round here, but he's got to beat Jimmy Graham by the time the season comes around. And look, I'm not saying that Sean Payton or the Broncos ever viewed him as like, he's going to be Jimmy Graham come week 1 of the regular season. No, it's could he become a player who maybe has a similar path that Jimmy Graham did essentially? Well, so much of that is, okay, that's the vision, but it's the work, it's the practices, it's the games, it's all the in-between stuff between the moment he was drafted to the time where the Broncos take foot on, week 1 against the Tennessee Titans, whether or not he makes the active roster. Where is he at in his timeline in terms of developing as a player, or maybe becoming a little bit more further along? That's where I feel like we haven't seen it. Now, I'd say like the first week of training camp, Sayre, I was excited about some of the things that Lohner was doing. He was getting involved in some team stuff, catching passes from Jarrett Stidham on some RPO looks. He's catching a touchdown pass from Bo Nix in 7-on-7. It's like, okay, he's got the size. They're working him in. This is a good sign here. And then all of a sudden, it was just like this radio silence. Things just kind of dropped off. Not that his performance dropped off or that he just wasn't being featured. It's just there was nothing happening with Lohner. And then you get a guy like Caden Prescorn who comes in, and all of a sudden, 1 week in practice, he's becoming the consistent guy. Lucas Kroll is seeing more time with Bo Nix in that offense as well, getting reps with him. And then now it's like Lohner's kind of fallen a little bit to the wayside. So that you go to the preseason. First game, I don't even think we really heard his name called at all. Second game, you mentioned the 3 penalties. That was problematic there, but also his route tree is not really refined. I feel like he can only do a couple of routes. I feel like he can get to the flat, and I think he can run vertical. But if you're asking him to, plant his foot at 10 yards and break in on a dig route, I don't know if he can do that to the rate in which Sean Payton wants his routes ran. So for me, it's so limited right now about Caleb Lohner, which maybe increases the chances of you bringing him back onto the practice squad and developing him. But Sean said it in the post-practice presser on Tuesday when asked about Lohner. He said, we got to get going. I mean, this is it. You have one more practice here on Thursday and then your preseason finale on Saturday. And if he doesn't showcase anything, more than likely, I don't see him making the 53, but I do see him potentially being brought back onto the practice squad.
Yeah, I said earlier this offseason that the Broncos invested a draft pick and therefore he's going to get stashed on the roster just like we saw Frank Crum last year or other guys at times under Sean Payton, right? But I don't know. I'm kind of eating my words a little bit at this point, Cody. I feel like he's way more raw than anyone really expected. And to that point, I think that what Sean Payton said is very true. Like, we got to go. Like, something's got to happen. We got to start seeing a little bit of this because you kind of feel like, what we have in our script here is like, is the vision for Caleb Lohner fading a little bit? When you're not seeing any glimpses, I wonder if at some point they're kind of like, oh, shoot, did we like totally misjudge this guy? I mean, or is it a matter of just being overly impatient? I think they would be able to get him to the practice squad. Honestly, I know they were competing with the Colts, and the Colts have a bunch of tight ends on their roster right now. They took one in the first round, obviously. So they clearly are trying to, I mean, teams will want a guy like this with his athletic traits, his size, the potential, that's why the Broncos drafted him instead of waiting for undrafted free agency. But I think he could get back to the practice squad based on what we've seen. I think that teams will have the tape and they'll be able to look and say, oh yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily, if we want to spend a practice squad spot there, let the Broncos try and figure that one out. So I don't know. I'm kind of pessimistic about his 53-man chances at this point.
Well, I wanted to ask you this question, just your vibe. When Sean said that the other day about Lohner, the way he said, we got to get going, it kind of seemed like, not like it, just like a general statement, but it seemed like from Sean's standpoint, if you hear his tone of voice, it sounds like there was a little bit of urgency in the message there from Sean about Caleb. Now, let me ask you this. If Caleb goes out there and let's say he has a 4-catch game, like does anything in terms of his performance, like if he performs really well in this preseason finale against the Saints, does that change your mind? Or are you still kind of on the boat of, hey, I feel like we could sneak this guy into the practice squad? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to formulating this roster, it's about trying to figure out the numbers game, and numbers at another position might be the determining factor in what you do with a guy like Lohner.
I think it does change the perception because like we talked about right after that second preseason game, we kind of talked about the fact that, hey, we saw sort of the downside to taking somebody with just a lot of upside, right? We saw the downside of that. I mean, the penalties, misalignment, or not running routes the way that Sean Payton wants them to be run. We have not yet seen the reasons that make him an upside draft pick, which were the pass catching abilities, the red zone stuff, even the ability to go out there on, the kick or the field goal unit and try to get your hand up. Although I know teams aren't necessarily scoring a lot on the Broncos these days or moving the ball even into field goal range. So I just think we do need to see the reasons that make him a high upside pick, right? And if you see those things, if you get those things on tape against, it doesn't matter if it's second string, third string, doesn't matter. If you get a proof of concept at this level that he can go out there and make those plays, make those catches, convert on third down, you got to get him involved somehow. That's why I think we're talking about him today. So we want to see him involved in the offensive game plan. And we've kind of been calling for that from the tight ends since the beginning of the preseason. So this is now on the coaching staff to, hey, give us a clear look at this guy. If he's not getting open, there's only so much you could do, right? But get him chances, design plays that are supposed to go to him, and let us see why you felt he was worth drafting in the first place.
Well, and I would say too, when it comes to like the blocking game, I feel like this is an area I thought he was going to be further along than maybe where he is right now. And maybe my opinion is different than the coaching staff's, though I don't know if it is at this point. With the new emphasis on the outside wide zone scheme that the Broncos are running here, you heard Adam Troutman talking about it at his press conference about getting to landmarks, right? Like these guys have to adjust. If there's a defensive lineman or DN or an outside linebacker that's inside shade of the tight end, he has to help out on that initially. Then he has to get to a landmark to try to get maybe a linebacker or a safety. So it is a timing concept thing. Is he able to get out there fast enough? I don't know, right? But certainly we're going to find out here on Saturday whether or not Caleb Lohner's stock increases or if it drops a little bit, and whether it influences what the Broncos ultimately decide to do with him whether they bring him to the 53, whether they move him to the practice squad, or if they move on. Everything is a possibility right now here as the preseason gets ready to wind down here. But Broncos country, we're not done yet. We still got a lot to talk about. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Audric Estime and how this could be his final big audition here for the Denver Broncos after just one season after being drafted. We'll highlight him and more here on today's episode of the show.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. And Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, and get smart categorization of your spending, which we all need, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet.
Well, my wife and I just wrapped up our wedding and our honeymoon, and Monarch Money helps us see our financial picture right in front of us. It allows us to collaborate and also set goals financially. So don't let the financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNFL. Saturday's preseason finale against the New Orleans Saints could be Audric Estime's finale with the Denver Broncos. Broncos country, we'll go through and talk about what he has to do in order to make that last case for himself as the Broncos' crowded running back room faces some tough decisions here. Just want to say thank you once again to everyone in Broncos country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. I mean, we've done a really good job, I feel like, of highlighting a lot of players here today that have a lot to prove in Saturday's preseason finale. I think you can make the argument here. Audric Estime probably has the most to prove out of anybody on this roster. Some of it is by design when you talk about the depth at the running back position. Some of it is a little unfair when you factor in that Audric is the youngest person on this roster right here. This could be it for Estime if he doesn't have a big game. And even if he does, it still doesn't necessarily solidify his chances at making a 53-man roster.
Right, because remember just 2 years ago, Albert Okwuegbunam against the Rams, I mean, had an incredible game, and all of us were kind of like, man, if he didn't put on a show for another team via trade, he definitely put on enough of one to stay on the Broncos roster, and lo and behold, he wasn't traded, I don't think, or maybe he was traded to the Eagles at that point, but either way, you want to get at least a good enough audition to go ahead and make a trade here as opposed to just cutting this guy, Cody. That's the thing that really is unsettling to me about this whole situation is you just invested a 5th round pick last year. And I know that day 3 draft picks are dart throws at best, and you want to still invest them properly because the Broncos have hit on quite a few day 3 draft picks under general manager George Paton. So I just don't want to throw this guy away. Like you said, youngest player on the roster. He has so much upside, I think, when you talk about his ability to run between the tackles, to create yardage after contact. He's got good contact balance. I think that there's a lot to like about Audric Estime. I don't know that necessarily the fit in Denver, I guess, is the right one. And if that's the case, then trade him somewhere. Trade him to another team. Don't just cut this guy because there's got to be teams that are near the bottom of the waiver wire who would have no shot at getting Estime. And the last thing you really want is the team that has the number one priority on waivers right now would be the Tennessee Titans, who is the Broncos' week 1 opponent. Who do you think is going to claim Audric Estime off of waivers if the Broncos go ahead and give him up via just cutting him? So I would trade him, Cody. Honestly, if they can't find a trade, I might find a way to finagle the roster to keep him around.
Well, when you factor in some of that information, I'm glad you brought up the Titans because they, had an injury occur to Tyjae Spears here during training camp, which Tyjae Spears, I feel like, was very talented there in Tennessee last year. He, was a little bit of a spark plug for him and would be a problem here, in terms of going up against him because the different combination of backs. I could see Tennessee looking at potentially trying to grab Estime. That's why I think it probably would make more sense that they would look to maybe trade him here. And San Francisco comes to mind too, because obviously they're banged up at running back as well. I know they just put one of their backs on injured reserve, and they're maybe looking to trade for a receiver. They're looking to trade for a running back at this point. And they obviously have a previously good working relationship, George Payton, John Lynch, in terms of being able to work out trades. So that might be something to keep an eye on here. I just think, and you mentioned something about Estime and just this Broncos offense that I find to be interesting. Obviously, with the change of approach in the blocking scheme, Sean told me the other day a lot of whether it's an inside zone approach or an outside zone depends on the front that they're facing. You know, the landmarks, the coaching on it is going to be different based on whatever front the Broncos offensive line has to go up against. For me, like the outside zone, right, where it's, hey, we're trying to extend it out wide, and then if the cutback's there, we want you to hit it. I don't know if that is necessarily Estime's game. I think Estime is better off as a downhill guy because there's even times where even in the preseason, the cutback is not there and he's forced to bounce it outside. But guess what? Nothing's outside either. And it's like, that's where I get a little frustrated is that I would have loved to see Estime get some reps with the first team offense, get some reps with the second team offense, and just see what he can do. I don't think that we have any questions about Tyler Bidet or Jaleel McLaughlin and what they can do, but you know, he is your youngest guy in the roster. You drafted him last year. You had a 3rd round grade on him. So what has changed? Now, well, obviously, if we look at history, Sean Payton's not afraid to make these types of decisions. I mean, he'll even tell you as well. They drafted a running back in the 4th round in New Orleans. Then they had an undrafted running back emerge. They cut the guy that they drafted, and then you had the undrafted guy starting, and he helped you in the Super Bowl at one point. That's the business side of it that Sean Payton's not necessarily afraid of, even though it's like we liked what maybe this guy could have been. It's just not the right system fit. And all signs right now kind of pinpoint that maybe just estimating the Broncos fit isn't maybe what we thought it was. And that's okay, but it just still kind of stinks because you're giving up on a player by essentially saying, hey, he's not going to be on our roster. I felt like he could have helped a lot last year, and they didn't ride the hot hand enough a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think after that Chiefs game, we were all hoping to see a little bit more of him, but they continued to go back to Javonte Williams, which was not fruitful in the least for this team. So the good news for the Broncos is you've overhauled the running back position completely. I mean, we haven't even really gotten to see much of J.K. Dobbins with that top offense yet, which I think everyone's going to be excited to finally get to see in person and or at least on your screen, right? And then RJ Harvey, you know, he's going to be those two guys. Like we're talking about the back end of the roster with all of these guys. We're talking about potentially your 6th receiver. We're talking about potentially your last tight end, and we're talking about your potential 5th running back. And so it's not like we're not trying to make mountains out of molehills here, but we are talking about guys that you have invested in the NFL draft. You're investing in player development. You're investing in young guys at certain positions that you need help, quite frankly. The running back was terrible for the Broncos last year. So was tight end, and so was wide receiver. So that's why we're talking about these guys, because they were all of them at, you know, to certain degrees expected to help this team. And now we're talking about whether or not they're going to be on it. So I think that's the fascinating thing about somebody like Estime. And you're right, Cody, there's so many teams out there that are scouring the waiver wire right now for running back help. Not to like the 49ers, like you mentioned. I know the Dolphins have been sniffing around running backs. I think Royce Freeman just got signed by the Chicago Bears. Like, I know that there's a lot of teams out there that are looking for running backs. And it's just a matter of what can the Broncos realistically get in return. We know they need tight end help. So is there some team out there that could help them? Can you flip Audric Estime and something else to get, I don't know if the Bears are trying to trade Cole Kmet. Are they? Because I don't know. I think they drafted Colson Loveland in the 1st round. So we'll see what happens. But I'm just like to throw ideas out there now because we don't know what's going to happen when the roster cut down frenzy takes place.
Yeah. And look, the NFL carousel, it's always a wild one. And you're going to see players that are on a team one year go to another team. And look, there's a chance Estime, if he gets traded or released by the Broncos, there's a chance he ends up with some team. Heck, could even be within the division. And he has success. And, you know, that Sean has talked a lot about, we don't want a guy who's been here go to have, you know, leave this building and go have success elsewhere. But sometimes when you factor in the circumstances, like Denver's 2 running backs right now with JK and with RJ, those are clear-cut upgrades right now. It's just another tier over anything else the Broncos have at running back. A lot of these changes that you and I were saying, like last year, the Broncos needed players like this. The roster turnover, the guys coming in that they have drafted and added, it has improved the roster, the perception of it at least so much that it's like, all right, the Broncos are now willing to maybe move on from this guy or this other guy, like we talked about earlier, and a Devon Vele potentially here. That's what makes things wild. It changes every single year, and that's why we do it. Broncos Country. That'll wrap up today's episode of the show. We appreciate you so much. Do you agree with us on the 3 players that we feel like have the most to prove in Saturday's preseason finale against the New Orleans Saints? Make sure you let us know here. But for all you everydayers, tomorrow's episode of the show, Sayre and I, we're going to sit down. We're each going to give you 3 players on offense, 3 players on defense, and our keys to victory for the Broncos preseason finale. And you'll get a post-game show as well here on Locked On Broncos. With that said, for your second listen, go check out our friends over there at Locked On Fantasy Football. Broncos Country, we'll see you next time for a brand new episode of the show.